Before we start the podcast, we wanted to let you know about WestOS. If you're a teacher or pupil at a school in Scotland, then you now have access to hundreds of quality assured video lessons created by teachers to support your remote learning. You should be able to find WestOS within the app library of Glow, where you can add the tile to your own personal launchpad. Click on the tile and you'll have immediate access to stream lessons in every area of the Scottish curriculum, with video lessons already available for biology at National 5, Higher and Advanced Higher. Now let's get on with the podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Lecky textbooks, revision guides and practice papers. Everything you need to learn, review and prepare for your senior phase assessments. Browse the books at www.leckyscotland.co.uk and get 40% off using the discount code LECKYPODCAST40. And remember, you can now collect Young Scot reward points by using the codes within the description of each episode to claim discounts and rewards on their website, www.young.scot.
The Nigerian breweries make a Guinness, which the brewers in Dublin drink. It's regarded as one of the best Guinness in the world.
In this episode, we'll learn about Sir Geoff Palmer, his personal journey, and also about how higher biology could open up a pathway into the global industry of brewing and distilling. Most importantly, we'll consider how this man overcame racism, poverty, and other challenges along the way. We all face challenges, and it's the way that we deal with them that can determine our success. Being resilient means having the courage to bounce back and take risks, despite adversity and initial setbacks. But some people may unfortunately face prejudice, and as writer and poet Maya Angelou once said, prejudice is a burden that confuses the past, threatens the future, and renders the present inaccessible. My conversation with Sir Geoff began with a few technical issues as we grappled with the technology.
I can't see myself at the top, but that's okay.
That's okay. It says Sir Geoff's iPhone.
Okay, brilliant.
Yeah, the iPhone got a knighthood as well, see. What was it like getting a knighthood, Geoff?
Well, it was interesting because the letter arrived. You know, if you're going to get one, that's what happened. And I'm the person who could help you because I'm on the committee that decides now who gets one. So, so if I see your name...
I doubt it. The only request I'll make is, can we have less celebrities and more people that make a difference? Right.
Well, it's good to telling me that because since I started, there have been fewer.
Good.
Celebrities. But it's nice. You get a letter saying, you know, the Prime Minister and the Queen. And then I took it up and showed the wife and said, you still have to do the garden. So that's what happens. You get a letter.
Do you get the old sword over the shoulder?
Yep. It could be Buckingham Palace or Holyrood. And mine was in Holyrood. And you arrive. And it's a big, very big guy, you know, looks, gosh, you think if you say a word, he could do you a lot of damage. But he was very courteous. And he sort of put you in a queue and you do all the things. And then you're told what time. And everything is very military. And my wife and my friend was in the audience, so you could see them behind you. And the Queen comes in and you walk up and you they've got a stool with a handle, so you make sure you can get up if you get down. And she comes in and she asks you things, which I don't know if she remembers that stuff, because she said, are you still at Edinburgh, or are you doing so-and-so? And, you know, you say yes or no. And then there's a signal from the guy, standing big guy with a little book, and he reads out the citation. And the Queen takes a very big sword from a guy standing nearby, and she taps you on the shoulder with it. And the thing I was thinking about, if that's a real sword, my God, those guys who were killing each other with it a few years ago, it must have been awful to be stabbed by a sword, because it was very heavy. And then she smiles, and you know it's over. So when the people at the top smiles, you know it's goodbye.
So no cup of tea or
no cup. The tea were probably may have had one earlier, but no, you're tapped on the shoulder, and you're moved away to a room, and then you get I think you get something, I can't remember. You get a box with a badge, and that's it.
That's it. So no socialising with the Queen then.
Well, no. On other occasions, yes. When I got the OBE, that was at Buckingham Palace, and she sort of was very chatty then. Asked me what I did. How long have I been doing it? And I said, just as long as you, Your Majesty. I've been doing yours. And she just rolled over laughing. And I forgot to back away. I just turned around and walked off.
It hasn't always been tea parties and knighthoods, though, as Sir Geoff Palmer's journey to rubbing shoulders with royalty was one filled with adversity. Arriving in the UK from Jamaica, just 14 years old back in the 1950s, he was declared educationally subnormal. That didn't stop him going on to break almost every stereotype going at the time, facing racism, poverty, and various associated educational challenges along the way. He eventually became the UK's first professor of brewing and distilling, and in the process, Scotland's first black professor. I guess we'll maybe start at the beginning of your own journey, your own educational journey. I believe that started in Jamaica. What was school like in Jamaica?
Well, Jamaica, as you know, was a British colony, and Jamaica goes back to 1655. That's before even Scotland and the Union in 1707. So I come from a background which is, of course, slavery related, because the British or the English first took Jamaica and then it became British in that sense. And our lifestyle in Jamaica is very British. The church, the school, the way we live. Of course, we play a lot more cricket than you do in Scotland. But the whole culture is very similar to the culture you have in Scotland, because we have a British culture. Now, I went to a small school. It's a church school in Jamaica, whereby the church was located at North Street and Princes Street, believe it or not, because, Princes Street is your main street in Edinburgh. And I didn't realize that the street next to me in Jamaica was Princes Street. And that again shows the historical links in terms of names. And I went to a small school called North Street School, and it was linked to the church. So you went to the church on the Sunday 3 times, morning service, Sunday school, night service with my aunts, because my mother left me in 1951 to come to London and work as a migrant in 1951. And therefore she left me with her sisters. So my aunts looked after me. So I had to go to church and I had to go to school. And it was very basic schooling. It wasn't preparing you for exams or anything like that. And I stayed at that school until I was about 13. And then I went to another school. And I left Jamaica when I was 14 years and about 11 months to come to Britain, because my mother wanted me to join her. She was here on her own working, and she needed somebody, her son, her eldest son, to help her. So she sent £86 to bring me to Britain. And I got on a plane for the first time. The first time I'd been close up to a plane. I'd seen them flying overhead, but I was taken to the plane. I got off in New York, and then I got a boat in New York, a ship. And the ship took me to Liverpool. And I got off at Liverpool, and I didn't know where I was. So I had to get to Paddington to meet my mother at the train station. And I had to ask people in Liverpool where Paddington was. And I got a train, and I met my mother in Paddington. So somebody who I had not seen since 1951. This was now 1955. And I didn't recognize her. So had she not recognized me, then I would have been in some trouble. So my mom met me at the station, took me home. She had one single room in the attic. And we both stayed in that one small room. Overnight, she fed me, and the next morning, she said I should get up and we're going to work, because she got me a job as a grocery delivery boy. It was what called a milk shop, and you had to deliver sandwiches. And she got me that job. Unfortunately, she was taking me out the front door, the day after I arrived. I've just traveled 5,000 miles. She got me up at 6 o'clock, got me to the front door about 7:30, and there was a man standing at the door. And it is that incident why I'm talking to you today, because the man was from the immigration services. And in those days, they would check on children when they arrive all over the country. And it was easy to do because there were not many children. 5 years later, they stopped it. So the man said to my mom, "Where are you going?" And my mom said, "Well, this is my son and he's going to work." And the man said, "You can go to work, but he can't. He's not 15. And in those days in London, you left school at 15. And my mom said, "But I'm 14 years and 11 months. My birthday is April. This was March." And the man said, "I don't make the rules. He's got to go to school." And my mom took me to the local school, but they rejected me and said I was educationally subnormal because I didn't have a lot of formal education for exam taking. And I had to go to the other school, which was a secondary modern school. And that school was for boys and girls who didn't have much future, all white. And that's where I went. And you left that school and you work as a road cleaner, or you went into a factory. And that's the school I went to. And I joined the school in March, but the head teacher said he will not take me for 1 month. So all coincidences, nothing to do with my ability. The head teacher said I had to stay till June for the summer term. My mom objected because she wanted her £86 back. She just a Jamaican term. She wants her £86 back. But she had to let me go to school. And the headmaster said I had to stay till June. So I stayed until June. Unfortunately for me, I was very good at cricket. The games master saw me playing one day at lunchtime, and he said, "Could you be here tomorrow evening?" And then he took me to a place in London called Gants Hill. And there were lots of boys there with their fathers, with cars, cricket bags. We took the bus. And I was asked to bowl and bat. And I just thought it was just an exercise, of playing cricket. I didn't know what for, but I did my best. And the next morning, the games master came to my class, called me out, and said, "You've been picked. You're playing for London." So I was 10 million people, and I was now representing the school sector in London. And it was a prerogative of grammar school boys, the London schoolboy team, because the fixtures were Eton, Harrow, Winchester, and Middlesex Coles. I went to these schools playing cricket, and I had no idea who they were. In fact, one of the boys at Eton, I was so sorry for him because he was wearing a straw hat. I had no idea of the social meaning of these schools. And an article about my achievement in cricket appeared in the Islington Gazette. And the local grammar school headmaster rang my school and said to the head teacher, he wants me to come to Highbury County. That's a grammar school, which was just up the road. And I thought, no, I didn't want that. And my mother didn't want that. But we went to the school because the headmaster said we had to. And he convinced my mother that in a grammar school I'd be better off. But the truth is, he told me later he really wanted a cricketer because the school wasn't doing very well at cricket. So I went to Highbury County School, a grammar school, from September 1955, and I stayed there till 1958. And I think I didn't do very well. In a sense, I got a couple of O-levels, and I think this was now beginning of my biology journey, because while I was at that school, grammar school, I found the not easiest, but the most interesting, and the one I could cope with in science better than physics, chemistry, or maths. And therefore, when I left that school, I got a job as a junior laboratory technician at London University, Queen Elizabeth's College. I saw the advert for a junior lab technician in 1958, and I applied. And Professor Chapman, the professor of biology, very distinguished man, he interviewed me for the job, and the interview went as follows. This is London University, Queen Elizabeth's College. And Professor Chapman came into the room, looked at me and said, "What's your name, young man?" And I said, "Godfrey Henry Oliver Palmer." And he said, "Can I call you Geoff? And you can have the job." And I said, "Fine." And ever since that day, I started calling myself Geoff. So that's a conversion, which some people would say, you shouldn't have put up with that. You should tell him your name is Godfrey and you want to be called Godfrey. But this is 1958, and I no job. I had to help my mother. The job was in the middle of London, and I lived on the outskirts, in terms of distance. And I worked there as a junior lab technician, cleaning and washing up after students. And one day, Professor Chapman, he just called me into his room one day, and he said, "Somehow I don't think you're stupid. And I know you're helping your mother with tribunal cases because the landlord was trying to chuck us out. The rent was half my mother's salary of £5. She was earning £5 a week, and the rent was half that."
Just to sort of clarify that for some of our younger listeners,
okay.
The £86 back in those days was a huge amount. So when you say yourself that your mum was earning £5 a week and half of that went on rent, that only left £2.50 for all the other bills and food and all the rest of it. And yet, over the time that she moved over to the UK, to have saved up £86 to bring you over was a huge saving and sacrifice to have done.
Yes, it was. In fact, when I think of it, that, as you've said quite rightly, I forgot that from 1951, it took her from 1951 to 1955 to save that £86. And she was paying her own rent at the time as well. So, so when Chapman gave me that opportunity, he gave me that opportunity on the basis that I was missing days from work because I had to go to the courts and to defend my mother and myself, because we were living in the same room. And I had to go to the library to read up about the court cases, about rooms, and when you rent, if you're a fully furnished or unfurnished. And if you were fully furnished, he could chuck you out. If you were part furnished, he couldn't. So I had to make up a case that we were part furnished. And, we won the case. So, that was pretty good. So Chapman was aware that I was doing all that and trying to travel halfway across London to work. And he then said to me, "I want you to go to the local polytechnic school, Polytechnic College, and try and get your A-levels and O-levels. And I want you out this building by 1961. So I went, and by 1961, I had probably 8 ordinary levels, and about 4 A-levels. And he then said, "Which university are you going to?" in 1961. And I said, "I'm not going anywhere." And he said, "What do you mean? You've got those qualifications, and I told you to apply." I said, "Apply, but no university would take me," because they said I wasn't an overseas student. I was an immigrant, and they not had applications from immigrants before. So I didn't fit in the overseas student category. So that was it. They just rejected me. So Chapman, when I told him that, he said to me, go the door and stand there and don't move until I come back out my room. And I stood there on a Friday afternoon. And then he came out of his room in about 15 minutes. And he said, you're going to Leicester University. So I said, okay, I didn't even know where Leicester University was because I lived in London all the time.
I guess it just shows the importance of having somebody that can stand up and fight your corner and I guess possibly in those circumstances knew the people to speak to overcome barriers that quite frankly should never have been there.
Absolutely. And the fact is the story until then is about the man at the door, the teacher who kept me for the summer term, the head teacher, and the grammar school teacher who got me there, albeit to play cricket. But all the stories about them people, as you've just said. I had the ability, but within the system, not designed for me to take progressions and not knowing how to do it. You will fall by the wayside.
Thankfully, our school system now doesn't have those different schools for different levels and sending people, I guess, into specific lines. But for many young people, they may within themselves feel as if they might not be capable or that there are various barriers to them and progressing on to possibly greater things. What advice would you give to those people that maybe don't face the same barriers these days, but possibly within themselves feel they're...
I think if you're having trouble and you're uncertain of anything, go see your teacher or see some a friend who has a family who knows about these things. Just especially with school, go talk to your teachers, go find your teacher and speak privately and tell them what, the problems you are facing, and because they have means of directing you to the appropriate persons and to address the appropriate situations. Sometimes, my mother couldn't help me because she herself wasn't educated. She left school at 11. And it was fortunate I met these people. So that's one of them would be my main advice.
And I guess at that age, you would have no idea of your own potential.
No idea. I was just drifting from one person putting me to another person within the education system. And so I was in university at Leicester in 1961. And I didn't really know why I was there. I'm thinking I was with a lot of other people, and Leicester was a so-called middle-classish university. It wasn't big, and thus the people there were quite well-placed. And I was then doing botany. So my biology interest from the grammar school, now I decided I was going to do an honours degree in botany.
And of course, that's a huge amount of studying the levels of studying start to grow at that point.
Yes.
You said you left school, I think I believe it was 1961, and you had 4 A levels and 8 O levels, which would be the equivalent of national fives and hires
right.
up in Scotland. You obviously lived with your mum in that one room. How did you find studying, and how did you overcome just having the space to study? Do you remember much about that at the time?
Yes, I do. We were living at a place called Bride Street, which was next to Pentonville Prison, where people were hanged. So that was where we lived. And, my mom would go to bed and there was a light. In those days, there were gas lights on the street. I don't know if they still are, but there were gas lights, and they would come on about, 7 o'clock. And I would sit by the window and just open the window partly, and I would do my homework with the gas light because I couldn't turn on the main light. I was studying using the gas light whenever I needed to work late. It wasn't a great quest. It was just me sitting there knowing I was at Highbury Grammar School and I had to get the homework done, and I wasn't all that keen on it. So there was no great drive or no great motivation. It was a matter of just getting through the grammar school and leaving, not knowing what I was going to do next. But what I think was important, my mother, uneducated, working in a factory in the East End of London, it's in dressmaking. She never asked me to do anything if she thought I looked busy. She never complained that she couldn't afford anything. And I was doing a paper round, so that was helping. I had 2 paper rounds in the morning, so I had to get up pretty early and put my clothes over my pajamas because it was so cold sometimes. And I was delivering newspapers, and sometimes I was late for school because I had 2 rounds. So, we lived in that way, and we had no conflicts. So if you've got parents, and always respect them, because you don't know how hard it is for them to even do what they're doing, even though one may think it isn't much. And that's what gave me my sense of belonging, which is critical. And I talk about in terms of race relations now to people in executive positions, that I say, one of the most important factors that you've got to develop early is a sense of belonging. And even with racism, that's what a racist goes for. That's what somebody goes for if they're trying to destabilize you. It's to go for your sense of belonging. What gives you your sense of purpose? What gives you that sense of self, yourself. And that's what what I think I developed. And another thing I developed was something which I've called in a book I've written called The Enlightenment. I call it system consciousness, is to be aware of the expectations of the system. So it's not to slavishly follow them, but it's to know how to deal with the expectations of the system. And those are little things which I didn't know what they were. I've described them since, a sense of belonging or system consciousness. But I think that's what helped me growing up. I had a brother, which I don't speak about a lot, but I had a young brother as well that came after me, and he got into, a group of kids, and he didn't have he wasn't as lucky as me, and he died not long ago, but he had a completely different life. So I come from a background which is not only tough in terms of myself, but I had a brother who was in the system, who went to jail and I had to leave university. My mother would ring and say, "Come down to London immediately, your brother is in trouble." And I had to leave immediately, and I'm in the Old Bailey. I don't even know what it was. And defending not only him, but other young kids at the time. So it's that responsibility, which probably I had, which also kept me on track. So when I got to Leicester University, that's where I met my wife. In fact, I never talk about her much, but that's where we met in 1961, and she's still around here somewhere, making sure that I've had something to eat before I speak to you. So we met in 1961, and she was white, and she and her ancestors come from Aberdeen, although she's born in England. So I met somebody with Scottish connections, so that also helped. And I did my botany. I got an honours degree. I didn't get a first or anything like that. I got a 2-2. And I loved the subject because it was about plants, and I seemed to understand that better than animals, because we had to do zoology as well. And I graduated with an honours degree, 2-2, in botany in 1964. And then I went back to London because London was where my mum is, and that's where I was going back to live. Say my wife, she went off to Hampshire and she got a job immediately, whereas I was in London. What do I do with an honours botany degree in London? And all my family and friends were saying, maybe you could get a job in the park, Finsbury Park, because they thought a park is linked up with botany. So I didn't know what to do. I went to the Labour Exchange. In London then they had a place called the Labour Exchange. And I said to the guys, 1964, late June, and I said, I'm looking for a job. And he said, well, what can you do? And I said, I've got a degree, and he said, turned to his friend and he said, here, John, he said, this guy's he says he's got a degree. I think he's got a temperature. That was how it was. And I just stood there because you don't do anything in circumstances like that. And he gave me 2 jobs. And one was in a betting shop, and the other one was peeling potatoes in Beale's restaurant in Holloway, near the Holloway Women's Prison. So I took the potato peeling job, and I worked there from June until December 1964. And but I knew I wanted to get out. But I saw an advert for an MSc at Nottingham University, and I applied. And this is one of my first famous interview, where a very senior politician sitting at the interview when I walked in 1964, I think it was early December. He just said, why don't I go back to where I come from and grow bananas? And I responded by saying it's difficult to grow bananas in Haringey. And I didn't get the job. So I advise your pupils don't say things like that at interviews.
You would certainly hope that nobody going for an interview these days would be faced with that blatant racism.
Absolutely.
And I couldn't help but think that even within the employment exchange, or the Labour Exchange, sorry, obviously that comment by that gentleman behind the desk about a degree, I guess that in itself strikes me as quite a racial.
But in those days, we've come, and this is what's so much interesting about our time today, with the death of George Floyd in America, with the killing of that young man, which I call a crucifixion. The point is that it's interesting that all these things in the past happened. We've had to have a race relation law in 1976. And I don't think anybody's paid any attention to it. The point is that before 1976, people said things like that openly. So there were race riots in Nottingham Gate, where I worked. And I used to walk through Nottingham Gate, and you had to run, basically, and just in case somebody kills you. And the other thing was that when I used to get up in the morning in London, the most terrifying thing for me was to pass the newsstand at a shop, because the newspapers used to be put outside, with in a clipboard or something, and I would look at the headlines, and the headline was 500 more arrive, and that was worrying because racists would see that 500 more arrive, and then for that day you would have to be very careful when you walk about the streets. So I grew up through all that, whereby in Smethwick at the general election, the one of the candidates put, if you want an N-word for a neighbour, vote Labour. And he won the seat. So that's how it was. And nobody paid any attention to it. As I said, I went to my interview in 1964, and I then reacted. And what I was saying was that it was my sense of belonging. I'm going nowhere because unless I can grow bananas in Haringey, I'm not going anywhere else to grow them. And that was the symbolism of my response. And I went back to my potato peeling, and I saw an advert for the Heriot Watt in Edinburgh and for a PhD. And I thought that's better than a master's, but I didn't know where Edinburgh was either. So I had to look it up on a map. And I arrived in Edinburgh for my interview with a famous lady, Professor Anna MacLeod from Lewis. And she is very well known, or at the time was very well known, as one of the first women to be in the brewing industry. She wasn't in the industry, she was teaching in the university, but everybody in the industry knew her because a lot of the brewers had attended the Heriot Watt, even at night for night classes. after the war. And so she was involved in this kind of teaching, not only for degrees, but for people coming in for night school who were trying to improve themselves. And she interviewed me. And it was just a wonderful interview because I didn't know her. And she used to wear a tweed suit and smoke senior service cigarettes, masses of them. But she was very much for what is called wider access. And it wasn't a word used then. This is 1964. She said, about the brewing industry and barley. The industry is based on barley, and the barley make into malt. And malt is used for making whiskey and beer and for biscuits, because Scotland is big on biscuits. And malt goes into biscuits like digestive and so and so. And I wasn't listening much because I'd never heard about barley. I did a botany degree. And I'm watching her. And then after about 10 minutes, she stopped and she said, "I'm going to take you." I said, "Why?" Because I knew I wasn't doing very well. And she said, "For two reasons, young man. One, when I was telling you about the industry and all the complexities of it, you were looking out the window." And I said, "What's good about that?" And she said, "It means you won't bother me. I hate keen people." Now, that was Anna. And that was from the Isle of Lewis. And she's daughter of the clergy and was indifferent to everybody. And but she took me. And we developed a working relationship. She gave me a bag of barley. That's all. When I arrived for my PhD at the area college, it wasn't a university. So I had to register at Edinburgh University because Edinburgh was a university and they could do PhD. So I registered at Edinburgh because I did the research at the Heriot-Watt College as it was then. And she was my boss at the Heriot-Watt, and my boss at Edinburgh University was Sir Edmund Hurst. And I then was trying now to negotiate the complexity of the system I didn't understand. It was new to me. But again, like I've done before, I just drifted with the flow, not making any ripples, going to the library, reading up on barley. And one of the most critical aspects of doing anything, if you don't know a lot about it, find out a lot about it. So I quietly went off to the library at the Botanic Gardens, which was near where I lived. And I spent every day at the Botanic Gardens in the library, reading up everything I could on barley, taking it back to as far early as publications. So when I started my PhD, I was ready, meaning that I didn't start till about January, late January, because I was reading up all that time in between to find out something about the subject I was going to do research on. And so she gave me no instructions. She just gave me a big bag of barley. And I then went in the lab in January, and that was 65 January, we published our first paper in 66 in Nature. We published one paper before that in 66, and then we published a paper in Nature in 1967. And when you publish in Nature, it's significant discoveries.
Of course, Nature, of course, is one of the biggest scientific publications on the planet.
Yes.
I guess that really adds a bit of weight at that point to your own name in terms of how you're perceived, especially when that name just appears on paper to people.
Yeah, that's right. I think that what we discovered was that, barley is so important, especially in not just Scotland, but you're talking about worldwide because of its use for animal feed and its use for brewing and distilling. And the whole point of barley is to change it into malt. Robert Burns grew barley. He knew a lot about it. And as I said, he wrote a poem/song called John Barleycorn, which is very famous. And the point is that I got the barley and I looked at it, started in 1965, as I said, and all the theories and concepts of how it changed from barley into malt. It's a germination process. So you take the barley, you soak it in water, and then you allow it to germinate. And of course, it has to germinate because the germination process triggers the enzyme production process. So if it doesn't germinate, barley, it is no use for the distillers and the brewers or for making biscuits, because you can't make malt if it doesn't germinate. So I was looking at the germination process, and I was looking at the associated enzyme development process, because they're linked. The fact that they're linked, I then, after a year looking at it, I thought, what the concept that was currently available, I thought wasn't right. And I said that to Anna, my boss. I said it. The concept was, when the grain germinates, it produces the enzymes that digest the endosperm, where the starch is and the protein is and the cell walls are. So all the enzymes that are required to digest the storage organ, which is called the endosperm, comes from the germ. So you're talking about amylase for digesting the starch, proteases for digesting the protein, and cell wall degrading enzymes. They're called beta-glucanases to digest the cell wall. And therefore, the technology is to make the malting process more efficient. You've got to produce more enzymes, or you've got to produce the enzymes more quickly, or the endosperm must be of such that it is easier to digest. So those are the principles: enzyme levels, speed of production, digestibility. And when I looked at those, I said, I don't think the germ is doing that. Consternation worldwide. Here's a black boy from Haringey and from Jamaica is telling Heineken and Carlsberg and Guinness and the distilling company that the germ doesn't do what they thought it was doing for 200 years. And they said, well, no, that can't be. And there were loads of research papers after I said that, trying to prove that I was wrong. And still up to last year, you have people still trying to say that I'm not right. But what is important is as follows. What my concept was that the germ produces a hormone, and that was known. I didn't discover that. The germ produces a hormone called gibberellic acid. And what I'm saying is that the germ produces the hormone, but it's the bran that produces the enzymes. Of significant levels of enzymes comes from the bran. Now, therefore, when you look at that concept, it's exactly the same concept in human biology. The hormone doesn't work where it's produced. It works elsewhere. It's transported. And that's the same concept that works in the grain. And biological organisms, producing energy in a plant is similar to producing energy in an animal. So therefore, the concept was that the grain germinates, it produces gibberellic acid, this hormone, and this hormone moves to the bran. It's transported out of the germ. It gets into the bran, and the bran then produces the enzyme. Now, because of that concept, you can see how I developed the abrasion process. So I did my PhD at the Heriot Watt. I finished my PhD in 1967. So technically I started in 65, January. I finished in 67, so it's quicker than normal. I then did a postdoc at Edinburgh, again linked with the Heriot Watt. And so that was now 1968. I then went to the Brewing Research Foundation. So the Brewing Research Foundation was an organization owned by the brewers, very unique. And it was based in Surrey, in England. And all the brewers, whether it's Scottish brewers, Belhaven, Tennant's, Bass, all the big breweries and small brewers in Britain contributed money to that research center. So it was worldwide, well-known, called the Brewing Research Foundation. And Anna, my boss, my PhD, another person, said to me, I want you to go there. I don't want you to go in industry. I don't want you to go teach. I don't want you. You should go to the Brewing Research Foundation. And she fixed it somehow. I met the director and Dr. Cook, who was the guy who worked out the structure for penicillin. So the brewing industry had this kind of scientists working for them. And so I went to the foundation in 1968. And I took my concept from the Harriet Ward, that it's the bran, not the germ. So when I arrived at the research foundation, which was highly competitive, I had to do something quick because then I would lose my job. I knew it. So I'm thinking now, how can I develop this brand concept of producing the enzymes? And we had known by then that you could take the bran off and put the gibberellic acid hormone on it, and it would produce enzymes. So I was certain I was right. However, is how can I develop that into an industrial concept and process? How could I do that? And my boss at the Research Institute wasn't a nice guy. He said, I want you to analyze 50,000 samples from all over the world, or something. And I said to him, look, Brian, I don't think that's going to get me anywhere. It's just routine analysis. You could do it with a machine. And he said, that's what I want you to do. So what I did, I had to work at night after I finished and weekends. And I've got a picture of my daughter sitting on my pilot machine because I had to take her in with me at weekends. And she's now 48. So I went in at night and I went in at weekends because my concept was, and a child could see it, if you have a germinating grain, the hormone comes from the germ, this is one end, and the bran goes all the way around the grain. Then if the bran is producing the enzymes from the front, because the hormone gets to the front of the bran there. So the hormone hits the bran there. But my view was if the hormone is hitting the bran there and it takes 5-10 days to creep along to stimulate the bran hormone, if I could get the hormone at the back, at the beginning of the process, because you could buy the hormone, gibberellic acid was available. Therefore, the germ would producing it for the front of the grain, but I could stick the hormone at the back as well by just spraying it on it. Well, I tried that and it didn't work. Then I realized that the bran outside the aleurone cells, these are the cells that produce the enzyme in the bran, that is covered with the pericarp tester, the fruit walls. So the cereal is a fruit. And its pericarp tester is very thin. And it's the pericarp tester, just like with an apple. The waxy layer on the outside keeps things out. So what I had to do was to damage that. And I took a pin and stuck it in one grain and then put the hormone on it. And it started to digest itself from both ends.
That would have saved a huge amount of time in that process then.
Oh, yeah. What we then did, we went from one grain to a pearling machine, which was designed to pearl the grain completely. But I only put it in for 10 turns.
And when we say pearl the grain, we mean taking the outer covering off?
Taking the outer covering off. So you end up with pearl barley. You would do that. But again, it's using one's imagination. If you pearling, it takes half an hour. But if you only put it in for 10 seconds, then it starts clarifying on the outside and it starts from the end. The germ is protected because the husk is thicker over the germ. It's thinner at the back. So 10 seconds, when I looked at those grains, I saw that the end was damaged. And the fact is that I looked at those 10 grains I did, and they were molting from both ends when I put the hormone on it. I then said, how can I make it to 10 pounds of grain? And I built a machine which looks exactly like the perler, and it did 100 weight. And then I just told my bosses, and they were all excited. And so even the boss who was against me, he was now for me. And my second publication, he put his name on it. And then we built a machine. Well, I didn't build it, but in Manchester, which did 10 tons an hour. And then people like Bass Charrington, the biggest brewer in the country, they had 8 machines. Allied Breweries, God knows how many, they had a brewery in Alloa. And that was great for me, because then I was the inventor of the abrasion process, which Watney Truman's, another big brewery, they were using it. And then it was patented in the name of the industry, not mine. But it went from one pin. So if you know the biology well, then you can innovate.
Within the higher course, we obviously look a little bit at fermentation when we look at respiration. And fermentation is obviously that key process within brewing, but we also look at crop production, productivity, photosynthesis. So right from the barley and etc. being grown, what advice would you give to any student who was maybe interested in studying those areas further and possibly getting into the kind of brewing and distilling industry, which is obviously, as you said, a worldwide industry?
Well, the advice, is that this is so-called the official advice, in that at the Heriot Watt, we have a brewing school, probably one of the best known in the world. It's called the International Centre for Brewing and Distilling, the ICBD. There's a lovely story to that, so which involves myself, in that shows you motivation when you're in some difficulty. That I came into work to teach at the Heriot Watt, and there was a note on my desk, and it said, that the brewing school may close if we don't get more funding. And I just got in my car because I thought I didn't want to lose my job. So I drove around to the headquarters of one of the big distillers, and I knew the production director, and I said to him, well, Mr. Martin, we're in some trouble. And he was very Scottish. He said, that's nonsense. They can't do anything about that institution. And cut a long story short, what he did, he said, go away, Geoffrey, and write me a page. And he got the Heriot Watt £1 million. And the brewers came in with about 400,000. And that's what was used to build the International Centre for Brewing and Distilling, which produce. Now, when you're drinking your craft beer, that's where they were educated. Now, what you can do if you want to go to the International Centre for Brewing and Distilling at Heriot Watt, if you get a first degree, and even if it's not necessarily in chemistry or physics or biology, as long as you've got a science base, you can apply. But those with science-based subjects, you apply to the Heriot Watt and you can come and do a diploma, or you can come and do a PhD. But the diploma tends to be very popular with people who've done a science degree in chemistry, physics, or biology. However, you can also go to the Heriot Watt and do an honours degree. You come in and just do a brewing degree. That will take you 4 years. But to go into the industry, most people do the honours degree or the diploma. Those are the two main ones.
That's the official advice. What's the unofficial advice?
The unofficial advice is that if you really want to go into the industry, then you really got to, get into university. A lot of people think the brewing and distilling industries are just, you can go down the road and buy some ingredients and make your own stuff. So that industry is highly technical. It's a tremendous amount of precision. When you buy a bottle of beer, it's 5% alcohol. It's not 5.1. It's not 4.9. It's 5. So they know exactly what they're doing. And that's why the higher education is critical for the industry. So what I'm saying is that the unofficial advice is that try and get into university if you can, because that's what most people are doing. And now you've got competition from all over the world. When I was there was 25 students. Last time I went and I give one lecture a year. And that's great because the students who are there, but reading my stuff from 1966, think I'm dead. And of course, they bring me in for this one lecture. And when I stand there, and all the students are sitting there from all over the world, Japan, China, Nigeria, Brazil, Lone Head, Edinburgh, Glasgow, and they're all sitting there looking, or from London or whatever, and they don't tell them who I am. And then they introduce me and they hear the name, and you can see the quizzical look on their faces because they think I was white. um, so again, it's a wonderful industry. And even if you do the brewing degree, you don't have to go into the industry. Some of my students, male and female, did the brewing degree and went into a bank, because an honors degree is about you're educated to think in certain ways. So any degree, you can use it to go anywhere, except being a doctor, those are professions. But a degree is about your capacity to think. So don't think a degree ties you down to one subject. That's so-called unofficial. But I think that industry is a good one. But you can also go into malting. You can make malt. You can also go into the distilling industry, not just brewing.
And these are obviously, as we said a couple of times, Geoff, these are global industries. You mentioned obviously having students from Nigeria, and one of the things that I'd heard before which kind of amazed me was actually, I think, one of the biggest beers in Nigeria is Guinness, but it's not the Guinness that we would associate with Ireland necessarily.
It is slightly different, and I'm glad you sort of brought that up, because again, it shows the wide capacity of the industry. It's one of the biggest marketing industries in the world, brewing and distilling. So if you wanted to go into that, then this is an industry to go in. But you mentioned Guinness, and it's a lovely little story that I was sitting at the Heriot Ward in the middle 80s, 85, 86, and my phone rang. And I sort of picked it up, thinking it's his usual call. And it was the production director of Guinness. And he was ringing from London. And they had a big brewery in London in those days. So when Guinness rings, because they're one of the biggest brewers and they support the university, so you really got to go. You can't say, I'm sorry, I've got a headache. So I went to London and I met the production director, and we sat in a restaurant, and he said, "Geoff, we've got a job for you." And I thought, working at Guinness, I thought, well, I'm happy in Edinburgh. But he just said, we want you to go to Nigeria for us. I was joking, typical penny cook humor. I said to him, well, John, I left Nigeria under very difficult circumstances about 250 years ago, and I don't want to go back. Of course, he smiled because I was alluding to slavery. And he said, well, you're the closest thing to a Nigerian we've got, so you've got to go for us. And what it was a serious problem. It was a problem of the Nigerian government had banned the import of European grain, barley and malt into Nigeria. Guinness has 4 breweries there. Heineken has 5. The Nigerian breweries make a Guinness, which the brewers in Dublin drink. It's regarded as one of the best Guinness in the world, the Nigerian Guinness. It's a bit stronger. So anyway, I had to go. So I got on the plane and I arrived in Nigeria for the first time. It's a great experience for me because I'm slave descent and I'm back in Nigeria to help Nigeria and to help a big international company. And what the help was that the Nigerian government banned European grain. So what was Guinness going to use? They can't afford to close 4 breweries in Nigeria because of the economic. The alternative was to use the local grain, which is grown in Nigeria, called sorghum. And your students and pupils can have a look at that to see if they know anything about sorghum. Now, sorghum is an African grain or tropical grain, which mainly grows in Africa and in India very well. It's also grown in America. And it's a grain. You can get white ones or red one. It looks like a pea, but it is exactly the same family, cereals, as barley and wheat and maize. It didn't have a high status then. People use it for animal feed. Cutting a long story short, we came to the conclusion that let's try sorghum, African grain in Guinness, international product. And this is exactly what we did. Because of the use of a local grain by a big international company, it then allowed a lot of local farmers who didn't have much to do with their grain other than for animal feed or for some food. It was exactly the same model as in Britain, where the farmers grow their grain for bakers and they grow their grains for brewers. Because if the bakers and brewers weren't there, these farmers would have nothing to do. And it's the same. A big company now using the local grain. And I was told by the professor from South Africa just 2 months ago, from Pretoria, he says, Geoff, what you've done is transform the whole of agriculture in terms of sorghum for Africa, in a sense that other breweries are now using sorghum. And it is also being used in local products, smaller breweries and in the food industry. And there is now Nigeria was nowhere in sorghum production when I went. It is now the fourth important production of sorghum in the world. You mentioned the one word Guinness, and in fact, at the time, I became then the Guinness consultant, going to Dublin and talking about barley there. But just that phone call and me going to Nigeria shows that plants have this flexibility that nobody thought to use sorghum for big international companies. If you go into the industry, that's how wide it is. And, I've done work for Coors in Colorado. That's their head office. The research for Coors was done in Edinburgh at the Heriot Watt. Mr. Coors wanted work done on barley because he's in Colorado and he doesn't have enough water to malt the grain. And he was figuring, could he malt it with less water? And so my research for 4 years for Coors was on trying to malt the grain more economically with less water.
Geoff, all I can say is thank you so much for giving your time to speak to all our students.
Thank you very much. In fact, could I just say one little thing? Because you mentioned respiration, and it shows, I was so lucky. Because when I went to Leicester University, I didn't know any biochemistry, because biochemistry was a new subject then in the 60s. And I decided to take biochemistry as a subsidiary subject, with my botany degree. And I turned up at this lecture, and there was this man there was wearing a white lab coat teaching, which is strange. You wear lab coats in the lab. And this man, he wasn't very tall, and he stood there, and his name was Kornberg, Hans Kornberg. And he sort of knew that we were botanists and not very bright. So he was trying to tell us, about biochemistry. And then he told us just this little story, in passing. Well, I did my PhD with Hans Krebs, of the Krebs cycle in respiration. And he has got the glycolytic pathway. That's his discovery. And we're sitting there listening to this. And the irony is, for your student, your respiration is Hans Krebs' discovery. And I was being taught by one of his students who developed the glycolytic pathway. And I'm sitting there struggling. And I can always remember that he did the TCA cycle, and he was pointing out where the ATP came from and all that. And as a botanist, shows you what a good teacher is. I still remember that, even though I wasn't keen on biochemistry. So as your students, it's wonderful that I've been educated in a way by chance, but I've had the opportunity of running into people like those.
And of course, the Krebs cycle we now refer to as the citric acid cycle, but it is fundamentally the same process. Yes,
that's right. In the old days, it's called the Krebs cycle. Those were the men who actually found out about that cycle, so we know exactly what respiration is there for.
I think one of the things that sometimes young people don't understand is that all of these things that we learn about, they actually all link back in together.
Absolutely, they link.
At this level, when we learn about it and higher, we're still very much learning our biology in sections and to understand the fundamental basics that we need to then build on, whether that's onto university to study it further, whether it be
absolutely
in brewing or any other science-based subject. So, Geoff, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to everyone.
No, it's my pleasure.
It's a huge honour for all of us.
Thank you very much, and good luck to all the pupils, and I'll be drinking your beer.
Remember, only consume alcohol once you're over 18 and go to drinkaware.co.uk for the facts. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your preferred platform and follow us on Twitter @BiologyHire. Don't forget you can get 40% off all Lecky textbooks, revision guides and practice papers using the discount code LeckyPodcast40 online at www.leckyscotland.co.uk.